What I was asked to talk about today is the specifics of the mobile era that we've been living in for the last 5 years and how that impacts the development of social networks. And what I want to do in the time that I've got is to develop a framework for understanding almost any problem that we would be asking ourselves in this particular era. How do we think about any change when the fundamentals around us are shifting from the desktop, in this case, to the smartphone? So I want to talk about the importance of understanding the relationship between context and products. Secondly, I want to look at what is the context now, what are the ingredients now that we need to understand to make almost any decisions about building products. And then I want to give some examples of some pretty profound changes that have taken place in the last 12 to 24 months that demonstrate how to execute in a time of huge change. And I'm going to start with, who knows who this is? Karl Marx, you're right. I was thinking I shouldn't put this guy on the slide here in Kiev, but this is such a good start that I decided, even though everybody hates the guy, it's worth remembering he did say some things that were good. And this is one of the good things that he said. He said, men make history, they make their own history, but they do not make it as they please. They do not make it under their self-selected circumstances, but under circumstances that already exist when they're born, given to them and transmitted from the past. And he goes on to say that the tradition of all the dead generations weighs like a nightmare on the brains of the living. In other words, when we choose to do something, if we're an entrepreneur or an investor or a developer, it really doesn't matter, we can't escape our context. There are some constants which exist around us. And if we don't understand the context, we end up doing this. We try to make products which are putting the square peg into the round hole. An equivalent of that would be today if I tried to get on stage and if I was pitching these investors that just left and tried to get very excited about building a website. Well, okay, it may be a great website, but let's be honest, in the age of mobile, nobody's really looking at websites. They're looking at apps. So it would be a square peg and a round hole. I'd be ignoring the context. I'd be pretending the world is still the way the world was 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. It isn't. It's a different world. And that's the beginning of understanding any product that we want to build. This is a good way to think about it. In any moment, when we're in any context, there are really 3 elements that still exist. There are elements which are coming from the past. There are elements which are all to do with the present. And then there is something of the future which is already suggested in the present. And the job of a product developer or an investor, an entrepreneur, or any of the disciplines which come together in this conference is to try to figure out that overlap, that transparent overlap you see between the present and the future. That overlap is now. Now, when you try to figure out now, it's very confusing. Some of the things which you look at are dying, but they're not yet dead, like this zombie. Not dead, but certainly not alive. An example of that in today's world would be the social networks that were built from 2005 to 2010. They're definitely alive in the same way that America Online is alive or Yandex is alive. They're alive, but they're not living. They're not going to grow and be big in the future. They represent the residues of the past that still exist. And so we wouldn't want to be focused on them as places to make decisions to make money or to build value. Other things are emerging, but they're not yet born. A good example of that, for example, would be ibeacons. Ibeacons are these low-power Bluetooth transmitters that Estimote in Krakow and other companies are producing, which allow your smartphone to create a micro-reference, like in a room maybe specific to a particular table or a chair, and tell your iPhone where it is that you're sitting. And from that, your iPhone can ask for information relevant to where you're sitting. This is a very new technology, but no one's yet built the killer product. It's not yet clear if this thing is going to be a huge part of the future or is just, if you like, a misdirection, something that looks interesting, but it will not end up being interesting. So it's emerging, but it isn't yet fully born. So whenever we look at the present, we're really working in that overlap between the past and the future, which is now. And our job is to figure out what to tie ourselves to, what to do that will be important. And if we choose a dying wave like the surfer, we will never surf. In order to surf, we have to choose a wave which is going to grow. And that's hard. It's very, very hard. And I'm going to probably shock you with some of my assessments about which are good waves and which are bad waves. Based on the decision you make, your life expectancy will be different. So I will say, if you decide today to go and build a web company, I would guarantee, I would think personally, that your life expectancy will be low. If you build a mobile app in a crowded sector that's already fully accounted for, your life expectancy will be low. But if you do something innovative and new, which humanity will need or want, you will have very high life expectancy. So life expectancy is a function of your choices, your decisions. You are not, if you like, the victim of history, but you get to make history by making good choices. Sometimes that means, you know, when you look at your existing business, you should be running away and not doing what you're doing. Other times, you should be standing and fighting to win because what you're doing is relevant, is valid. So that is, if you like, a framework to understand how to think about what it is we choose to do. Now let's look very specifically at today. I put a smartphone on this slide with all the messaging apps because, you know, Facebook just paid $19 billion for WhatsApp. And WeChat in China has close to 1 billion users already. Kik has about 300 million users. KakaoTalk in Korea has about 100 million users. Line in Japan has about 100 million users. And these messaging apps, by the way, are all using the address book of the phone in order to connect you to your friends. So you don't have to invite your friends anymore to join you. They're already there on the phone, and the app just makes use of them. It's a new paradigm and very different to the Facebook paradigm. This new paradigm is very different to the things we see here. These are what I characterize as the living dead, things which will not survive. Microsoft is on there. Why is Microsoft on there? Because nothing it is doing is relevant to the future. It's all about Microsoft trying to survive in order to still make money for its shareholders. But really, you don't want to buy a Windows phone. You really don't want to buy a Windows desktop. If you can afford a Mac, you'd rather buy one. You really probably don't even want a desktop at all if your tablet and your phone will do most of what you need to do. And that's going to be either Android or it's going to be Apple, not Microsoft. Flickr clearly was killed by Instagram. Flickr was huge. Everybody put their photos on Flickr. Now nobody puts their photos on Flickr, even though it's still alive. It's the World Wide Web. The World Wide Web, this is maybe a surprising one to be on the dying list. But the World Wide Web, and what I mean by the World Wide Web is web pages built to deliver a product or a service or just a message about a company, only survives if we're using desktops and laptops to look at web pages. But if in the average day, most of our hours are spent on apps, on mobile devices, this web page will live, but no one will look at it. And therefore, it's not really alive in any meaningful way. The internet is still alive. The internet, TCP, IP, for those who are more technical, is still alive. The apps are still using that, but the web, not so much. Well, what is the web? Google search is on the web. I don't know about you, but on my iPhone, on my Android phone, I don't do that many searches in Google search. When I'm sitting at my desk at home, I do quite a lot of searches on Google search. So if the desktop and the laptop are declining, pretty likely Google search is going to decline, and that means Google's revenues will decline. So Google needs to find some new things to do, like Android, like self-driving cars, if it wants to be relevant for the future. And I put other things on here as well, including Facebook, and I'm going to come back to Facebook. On the other hand, there are other things being born. I already mentioned most of them: iOS, Android, the Internet of Things, which is one of those terms that nobody really knows what it means because it means so many different things. But the Internet of Things is really the real world becoming knowable through your phone knowing where you are in the world, in a, not just GPS-wise, but very micro where you are, which room you're in, and knowing what else is in that room, and being able to get data, usually from the cloud, that tells you about the things in the room. An example would be if you go to the St. Andrew's Church in Kiev, your phone will know you're at the St. Andrew's Church. The church would have made the history of the church available in the cloud, and your phone could now start to understand what was happening there in the 10th century or the 11th century or the 16th century without you needing to have the tour guide. That would be an example of the Internet of Things. The Internet of Things is made up of sensors, which are devices which detect information and share it, and beacons, which are devices that just transmit their presence and don't have any detection going on. Beacons and sensors are the core building blocks of the Internet of Things. They're clearly at the very early stages, and new software will emerge that will, for example, if we already had in this room the Internet of Things, you could all have my business card on your phone, because my phone would be transmitting a number called a beacon. Your phones would listen to the number and would say to the cloud, what does this number mean? And the cloud would say, oh, that's Keith's business card. Do you want it? And you would say yes, and then you'd get my business card. That would be a good example of the Internet of Things. It's very easy. We could build that software today. No one has yet really done that. We have bumping to exchange business cards. We really don't need bumping anymore. We could do it without. This is the future. The cloud there, I put the blue cloud because that depicts a new cloud. The cloud clearly has been around for a long time. But the cloud which we're building today to support mobile devices is not the same cloud that was built in 2005 to support web browsers. This cloud has different characteristics and different needs. For example, alerts and notifications are a big part of the new cloud. They were not part of the old cloud. Storage is a big part of the new cloud. It was not a big part of the old cloud. Dropbox was around for a long time, but only got big when mobile took off, is a good example of that. So the mobile cloud is definitely a new animal that is still being defined, and there's still lots of opportunities to put services in the cloud to support applications on the phone. I think about that in the same way that Web 2.0 came about in around 2005 when we started TechCrunch. TechCrunch was built because of Web 2.0. We documented the new companies that were arising around Web 2.0 and became the focal point for them. Well, in a way, there's an Apps 2.0. Apps 2.0 is apps which consume services from the cloud. They don't build all the services in themselves. So companies like Parse, Urban Airship, Lair, and my Chat Center app, for example, is a cloud service for apps, are starting to be built to support services for apps. So you can see that if you are a decision maker and you are looking at your own business and you're looking outside at the world and trying to understand the context, you're looking in two directions at the same time. You're looking at the company you built because of the past, and you're looking at the opportunities you may have because of the future. And it's very hard to make the decision when to break from the past, for example, moving away from a web strategy, and when to focus on the future and move to a mobile strategy or even an Internet of Things strategy. It's a very hard decision, but it's a decision that you should make sooner rather than later, because if you don't make it soon, you become Microsoft, which is you're still alive, but you're no longer relevant to the future. So you have to reinvent yourself. Now, this is a guy who knows a lot about reinvention. Einstein made the point that we can't solve our problems using the same thinking that created the problems in the first place. So if we are in the present and we know we have a problem, Facebook, by the way, is one of those. Mark Zuckerberg, and this is really what the talk is about, knows he has a problem. His problem is becoming irrelevant. He doesn't want to become irrelevant, and he knows that if Facebook is a web company with a social network where you put your contacts from your phone in the cloud and you give him permission to run your contacts for you in his social graph, he knows that 2 or 3 years from now, because your phone can carry 10,000 contacts, he's not going to be relevant. You won't need that service. So he has very quickly to become relevant. And in doing that, he can't use the same thinking that did very well for him when he was creating Facebook. He has to use new thinking, different thinking. So what are the ingredients of this new thinking? I've already shown this slide, so I'm just going to remind you. The ingredients means the building blocks. What are the things which are growing that you must build a strategy on top of? If you build your strategy on top of anything else other than these things and some other things, Bitcoin probably could be in there as well. There's many things not in here. It's not meant to be an exclusive list, but it's a list of things which are obviously growing or being born. You have to start there. If you start there, the soup you make by the things you pick will be a good soup. In other words, you're going to be choosing from the elements that are alive and growing. If you don't pick from that list, you're going to be picking from a bad soup. You're going to be building on top of things that don't have a future. And these are the kind of questions that you're going to have to answer to figure out whether you can make a good soup or a bad soup. Firstly is, should you be mobile at all? Is mobile the right strategy for your business? Your customers, if it's businesses, or your consumers, if you're a consumer company, is mobile the right way to deliver what your vision tells you you want to deliver to them? If it is, then you still have a choice to make between delivering to consumers first or enterprise first. We live in a time where consumer behavior heavily influences later enterprise adoption. So most things which are big don't begin in the enterprise. They begin consumer, like Skype, for example, is a great example of something which began consumer. You also have to make choices like, where does the information come from? Think about building a traffic app that tells you how to get from A to B. There is Waze, W-A-Z-E, which Google just acquired for just over $1 billion, which has 100% of its information coming from drivers who drive down the road. When I drive from my home in Palo Alto to San Francisco, I put Waze, and Waze will say to me in whatever voice I choose. They even have an Elvis Presley voice. It says, "There's a policeman coming." You know, that's my attempt at an Elvis Presley voice. "There's a policeman up ahead," or "There's a policeman up ahead," or something like that. And that's because 25 drivers, when they passed that policeman, pressed a button that said, "There's a policeman." So now I know I better be not driving over the speed limit. This is crowdsourced data. It's a great source of information. It doesn't apply to everything. Is the restaurant good or bad? That's great for crowdsourcing. Is the hotel bar full or empty? That is great for crowdsourcing. Are there mainly guys in the bar or mainly girls in the bar? It's pretty good for crowdsourcing. There's lots of information which crowdsourcing is good for. And it produces applications that are very hard to reproduce, that give you a competitive advantage. Curation is another one. Beats Music, which Apple just acquired, Beats Music was not better than Spotify for streaming music. They were pretty much the same, and Spotify was bigger. But Beats Music was fantastic at curating the taste of the listener. So if you ever load Beats Music and you tell it what you like, within a few days, Beats Music is telling you what it thinks you will like, and 9 times out of 10, it's correct. And now you're discovering new music and old music from your past, and this is not being done by a computer, this is being done by human beings who understand these tastes. So it's people curation, not just artificial intelligence. Many other questions. Should you bootstrap? That is to say, can you grow from revenue? My company, EasyNet, which I started in 1994, did an IPO in 1996, never raised venture capital. We only had revenue, and we went to IPO with just revenue. I did another company in America in 1998 through 2002, Real Names. We raised $130 million of venture capital because it made sense not to have revenue initially in order to have growth. So huge questions about that. And then you ship the products based on your context, on those decisions. You have to ship your products. And I want to quickly move in my last 5 minutes to some examples. This is Downtown. It's an app only available in Palo Alto in California today. The company has only been in existence about 3 months. What Downtown has done is put ibeacons on coffee shop tables. And what it means is that you walk into the coffee shop, your phone says, "Hi, welcome to Cooper Cafe," which is one of the stores. You immediately sit at a table. You don't line up. Your phone knows the table you're sitting at. The menu comes. You order from the menu. And in the kitchen, on an iPad, they get the order. They bring you your food and your drink. You eat, you drink. And then when you're finished, you just leave. And the app pays the bill. You don't have to physically pay. So it does the ordering and it does the payments virtually. And so now the productivity of the cafe, the revenues in 4 weeks multiplied 300%. Most of the growth came from reordering. People who were at the table, who now, because they didn't have to stand up and go to the line, ordered more coffee or more cakes or whatever. So Downtown is a great soup. It's made of many elements which are to do with now. Mobile payments, ibeacons, ordering from a curated menu, and it's becoming very popular. It went from 1 restaurant to 10 restaurants in 3 months, and now it's moving to a self-service offering where any restaurant in the world will be able to order the beacons for the tables and install them by themselves, and it will just work. So it's an attempt to revolutionize the retail experience of eating and drinking. Facebook. I said Facebook was dying. Well, I was kind of lying. It isn't dying, it's being reborn. This is what the Facebook used to be. The website on the right, this is Facebook growing versus MySpace in its early days. But if you look at this website on the right, and now look at this slide, Facebook today doesn't look anything like Facebook used to look. It has Instagram. It was just announced today, actually, in the Times, New York Times, that the use of Facebook's website by teenagers in 3 months declined from 72% to under 42% in 3 months amongst teenagers. But Instagram is growing everywhere. I have 3 boys, young kids. They all use Instagram, and it's growing. Facebook owns Instagram. It paid $1 billion, which everybody thought was crazy. It probably was the smartest thing that Facebook ever did, because Instagram is relevant. Facebook is not relevant to the future, but Instagram is. WhatsApp, $19 billion, close to 20% of Facebook's IPO market cap, spent on one messaging app. Why? Because WhatsApp is built on the phone using the contacts you already have on the phone, using messaging you're already familiar with, and had 1 billion users in the world, and was growing faster than Facebook was growing. So it was a cheap acquisition, even though it was an expensive acquisition, because the price has to be compared with death. Should Facebook die or live? If that is the question, then to give 20% of your company or 10% of your company to buy this app was a good decision. Oculus Rift, Oculus, the face mask. I will never wear one of these ever, but I guarantee my kids will. And the virtual world is going to be becoming very real. And Facebook believes that if it can own the virtual world, the virtual bank, the virtual game, then it's also guaranteeing its future. And then on the side, we have at the top left here, Creative Labs, Facebook Creative Labs. Facebook is about to have an anonymous messaging app that it's about to release. Why? Because it knows that people like to pretend to be somebody else. And on Facebook, you cannot do that. You have to be your real self. So if it wants to be relevant, it must serve the need. So Facebook has entirely reinvented itself. This is a TechCrunch article making the point that Facebook's Creative Labs is making Facebook act like a startup. And if you really want to survive, you have to act like a startup. Microsoft did not have to die or be the living dead. It didn't have to. It could have made choices to survive, but it made the wrong choices. And the proof is here. Facebook's revenues from mobile, which when it did its IPO, the major risk for the investors was stated that mobile may grow so fast that Facebook will become irrelevant. And this was a major risk in the IPO. And if you remember, the Facebook price went down. They're no longer Facebook. They're Facebook 2. And it's a different company. Lastly, my own company, Chat Center. You would think it would be crazy. I have to finish soon, 1 minute. You would think it would be crazy to build an application which does mobile chat, because WhatsApp, who uses WhatsApp in this room? Probably lots of you. Lots of you. So why would anyone be crazy enough to build a mobile app for chat? Well, the reason is, for me at least, WhatsApp represents the end of a period of history. It's like on the desktop when there was an app called ICQ, which everybody used for chat. And it was acquired by America Online, and then it died. For me, WhatsApp is not the future. WhatsApp is the present. What Chat Center does is it takes chat away from apps and gives it to people. So my Chat Center address is Keith. If you know my address, and I'm going to show you it at the end, you can chat with me. You don't need any app. You need to know me, but you don't need a special app. And we don't even have to have the same app. We can have different apps, but you can still chat with me. That's what Chat Center does. It basically produces universal chat that is free. It's kind of like SMS, which is universal but not free, and WhatsApp and Line and the others, which are free but not universal, because there's different apps. And it puts them together. It allows something called click-to-chat, which is you can put your chat address anywhere, in Instagram or Twitter or on your website or in your email, and if someone clicks on it, you get an alert on your mobile phone and they're chatting with you. So it produces really, truly universal and free chat. It works in social media, it works with inside other apps, it works in email, in signatures. There's no advertising. That isn't how it makes money. The way it makes money is by selling names. So these three examples are set to show you that if you make the right choices, you can be huge. Global shipments of smartphones are the substance underneath this that is changing the world. And if you fail, you start again, like this guy, going round and round. You start again because if you keep trying, you'll eventually succeed. And that's the end of my talk about how to think about change in this era. This is my Chat Center address, chatcenter.me/Keith. If you type that in anywhere, you'll be chatting with me on my phone. And this is the URL for this particular document. If you like the slides, you can download them. Thank you all very much.